Welcome to the Creative Commons RX podcast. Before diving into this episode, I want to ensure we're all on the same page. This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to give you that shortcut, to really getting informed on the big, complex issues in healthcare finance.
By digging into the details.
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into something truly groundbreaking. Cell and gene therapies, CGTs, clinically amazing, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're talking potential one-time cures for really devastating diseases. A huge leap forward.
But there's this other side. The sources we looked at make it crystal clear. This clinical miracle comes with, an economic disruption that's just as big.
Yes, an economic disruption of equal magnitude. That's the phrase they use, and it really captures the challenge.
So our mission today for you listening is really to deconstruct these huge financial hurdles. We're talking multi-million-dollar treatments.
And figure out the new playbook, what payers, what providers, what manufacturers need to do to make sure patients can actually get these therapies.
Without, bankrupting the entire system in the process.
Mm-hmm. And it starts with what the sources call the curative paradox. This is the core tension.
Okay, break that down. The curative paradox.
You get a lifetime of value, right? A potential cure, all packed into one single treatment event.
Which sounds great.
It is great clinically, but financially, it means this enormous upfront payment. We're seeing prices over $3 million sometimes.
$3 million for one administration. How does something that valuable medically cause so much financial friction? It seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it's about the timing, the risk, and just the sheer scale of that upfront cost. It clashes completely with how our systems are set up.
Okay, so to understand the price, we need to go back to basics. Section 1 in the outline, right? The science behind the cost.
Exactly. We have to understand what these things are compared to traditional drugs. Let's start small.
Aspirin.
Aspirin, yeah. Tiny molecule, maybe 21 atoms, made through predictable chemistry. You can make generics for, maybe $1 to $4 million.
Cheap to develop, cheap to copy, predictable.
Totally predictable. Now, jump up to biologics. Think large molecules, maybe 25,000 atoms or more.
These aren't simple chemicals.
No, they're grown in living cell lines. And that process is inherently sensitive, variable.
So more complex to make. More risk.
A lot more risk. If something goes wrong with the cell line, the whole batch could be useless. That's why developing a biologic can cost, over $1 billion.
And that's reflected in the daily cost too, right? The sources mentioned a big difference.
Huge, like 20 times more than small molecules on average. Maybe $45 a day versus $2 a day. It's a different world.
Okay, so biologics are complex. Where do CGTs fit in? Are they just like super biologics?
They're a revolutionary subset, really the peak of this complexity. Especially the autologous therapies like ART.
Autologous meaning from the patient themselves.
Exactly. You take the patient's own T cells, you ship them off, engineer them in a lab to fight the cancer, then ship them back and infuse them into the patient.
So each treatment is custom made.
It's bespoke manufacturing for a single person. You can't just scale that up like aspirin. Every step is complex, tightly controlled, patient-specific.
And that drives the billion-dollar-plus development cost and these multi-million-dollar price tags.
It's the science, the manufacturing, the regulatory hurdles, the sheer risk involved. It all feeds into that final number.
Okay, so the price is high because the science is incredibly complex. But what about competition? Don't we usually rely on generics to bring prices down eventually? For biologics, that means biosimilars.
Right. Biosimilars are the equivalent for biologics, but, and this is a crucial point for anyone managing budgets, you absolutely cannot think of biosimilars like generics. It's a strategic mistake.
Why not? Aren't they just cheaper copies?
Not exactly. Generics are chemically identical. That's bioequivalence. It's relatively easy to prove chemically.
But biologics are too complex for that.
Precisely. Because they come from living systems, you can't make an identical copy. The best you can prove is that a biosimilar is highly similar with no clinically meaningful differences.
And proving that is harder.
Much harder. It requires significant clinical trials. So developing a biosimilar isn't cheap like a generic. It costs maybe $100 to $250 million.
Okay, so if it costs that much to develop, they can't offer the huge discounts we see with generics.
Exactly. They launch with maybe 15 to 35% discounts, not the 80 or 90% price cuts you get when a generic hits the market. So the potential savings are much lower.
And even those moderate savings might not be realized because of how we pay for drugs, specifically this buy and bill system.
Ah, yes. Buy and bill, particularly in Medicare Part B. This system can actively discourage doctors from using the cheaper biosimilar. It's a perverse incentive.
How does that work? The provider buys the drug, administers it, and gets paid back plus a fee.
Right. They get reimbursed the average sales price, the ASP, plus a 6% add-on fee. That fee is supposed to cover handling and overhead.
Wait, 6% of the price?
Yes. So if the original, more expensive biologic costs, say, $1,000, the provider gets a $60 add-on fee.
Okay.
But if the biosimilar is 30% cheaper, costing $700, the 6% add-on is only $42 jug.
So the provider actually makes more money, $18 more in profit, by choosing the more expensive drug.
Precisely. The rational financial choice for the provider, the higher absolute margin, is the more expensive option for Medicare and the taxpayer. It's a direct conflict.
Wow. So the payment system itself is actively undermining competition and keeping costs high, even before we get to the really expensive stuff like CGTs.
It shows a fundamental structural flaw.
Yeah.
If we can't even get the system to efficiently adopt a 15 or 30% cheaper alternative...
How are we possibly going to handle a $3 million therapy?
Exactly. Which brings us squarely into Section 2, why the traditional ways of paying just completely break down for CGTs. Let's start with hospitals and DRGs.
Diagnosis-related groups. That's the bundled payment hospitals get for inpatient stay, right? Like one payment for a hip replacement case.
Correct. It's designed for predictable, high-volume procedures. The hospital knows roughly what it costs, the DRG payment covers it. Maybe they make a little, maybe they lose a little, but it averages out.
But CGTs are the opposite. Low volume, incredibly high cost.
And when the first CAR-T therapies hit the market, it was chaos for hospitals. There was no specific DRG for them.
So what happened? Where'd they get slotted?
They often got mapped to existing DRGs, like the one for bone marrow transplants. But the payment rate for those DRGs was... well, it was nowhere near enough to even cover the cost of the CAR-T drug itself, let alone the rest of the hospital stay.
So hospitals were losing massive amounts of money on every single CAR-T patient.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars per patient, potentially. It was completely unsustainable. It basically meant only a few specialized centers could even consider offering the therapy.
That's a huge access barrier right there. Did the system respond? Did CMS, Medicare do anything?
They did, eventually. They created a new, higher-paying DRG, MS-DRG-018, specifically for CAR-T. And crucially, they introduced temporary extra payments called NTAPs.
NTAPs, new technology add-on payments. What do those do?
They provide extra money, sort of a boost on top of the DRG, specifically for new, expensive technologies. The idea is to help hospitals cover the cost while the tech is new and not fully accounted for in the base DRG rate.
Okay, that sounds helpful. But you said temporary.
That's the catch. NTAPs typically only last 2 or 3 years. After that, the payment is supposed to be fully incorporated into the regular DRG.
So hospitals face this financial cliff. They invest millions setting up a program, rely on the NTP for a couple of years, and then suddenly that extra money disappears.
Exactly. They're constantly worried about whether the base DRG rate will be adjusted enough to cover the costs once the NTP expires. It creates this ongoing financial uncertainty that makes long-term planning incredibly difficult.
So the inpatient payment system struggles.
Yeah.
What about the overall model? Fee-for-service seems like it would also have problems.
Fee-for-service, the standard pay-as-you-go model, is fundamentally mismatched for CGTs. It works okay for chronic diseases where you pay for visits, drugs, procedures over many years.
But CGTs flip that entirely.
Completely. You get a lifetime of value compressed into one single enormous upfront cost. The payment model isn't designed for that kind of financial shock.
Which leads to what the sources call the actuarial gamble for payers. Explain that.
Okay, think about how insurance works. Payers manage risk across large populations. For chronic diseases, the costs are statistically predictable, spread out, It's manageable risk.
But CGTs aren't like that.
No, they turn manageable statistics into a catastrophic, unpredictable event, like winning a terrible lottery. One single patient needing a $3 million therapy can blow the entire annual budget for a small health plan, or a self-insured employer, or even a state Medicaid program.
There was that staggering example about sickle cell disease and Medicaid. Can you remind us of those numbers?
Yeah, the analysis suggested that if you gave a hypothetical $2 million gene therapy to all Medicaid patients currently eligible, the additional budget needed would be around $120 billion.
Billion, with a B.
Yes. That's not just a budget line item, it's a solvency crisis. No state can suddenly absorb that kind of hit. It fundamentally changes the nature of financial risk for payers.
Okay, so this extreme cost pressure leads to what the sources identify as a triad of payer challenges. These three things together create this gridlock. What's the first one?
The first is the most obvious. Extreme budget impact and financial shock. Just the sheer size of that upfront payment. It's impossible to budget for accurately if you're a smaller plan.
Right, the sticker shock. What's number two?
Number two is clinical and durability uncertainty, or you could call it performance risk.
Meaning, does the cure actually last?
Exactly. Payers are being asked to pay millions today based on often relatively short-term clinical trial data, maybe 3, maybe 5 years of follow-up. What if the cure wears off after 7 years or 10?
The payer has paid the massive upfront cost, and they're potentially back to paying for chronic care management down the line.
Precisely. They bear the risk that the long-term real-world performance doesn't match the initial promise.
Okay, budget shock, performance risk, and the third one, which you said is kind of uniquely American.
Yes, the patient portability problem. This stems directly from our fragmented insurance system where people change jobs, move states, switch between private insurance and Medicare.
How did that create a problem for CGTs?
Think about it. Payer A covers the $3 million cost for the CGT cure. The patient is cured, fantastic. But 2 years later, that patient changes jobs and is now covered by Payer B.
So Payer A paid the entire cost.
And Payer B gets all the financial benefits. Payer B avoids paying for all the chronic care, the hospitalizations, the drugs that patient would have needed without the cure.
That seems fundamentally unfair. It creates a huge disincentive for Payer A to invest in the cure in the first place, doesn't it? Why pay millions just to save a competitor money later on?
Exactly. It's sometimes called the wrong pocket problem. The costs land in one pocket, the savings in another. It's a massive structural barrier to payers embracing these curative therapies, even if they believe in the clinical value.
So this triad, the budget shock, the performance risk, and this portability issue, creates what the sources called a negotiation impasse. Price cuts alone won't fix it.
Correct. You can't just haggle the price down enough to solve these fundamental structural issues. It requires a different kind of solution, a different kind of contract.
Which brings us to Section 3, Innovative Payment Models, or IPMs. These are designed specifically to tackle these risks.
Yes, IPMs are essential tools. They're not just creative ideas. They're becoming structurally necessary to manage these therapies.
Let's break down the main types. First up, outcomes-based contracts, OBCs. These seem aimed right at that performance risk issue.
That's their primary target, mitigating performance risk. The core idea is simple. Link the payment to whether the therapy actually works as promised.
How's that work in practice? You pay up front, but...
Typically, yes, there's an upfront payment, but the contract stipulates that if certain pre-agreed clinical outcomes aren't met by a certain time point, the manufacturer has to provide a rebate, either partial or full.
So the manufacturer shares the risk if the drug doesn't perform in the real world.
Exactly. It shifts some of that performance risk back from the payer to the drug maker.
Okay, OBCs handle performance risk. What about the immediate budget shock, that huge upfront payment?
For that, we have models like annuity or installment plans. These are basically financing tools.
Like paying for a car over time.
Sort of, yeah. Instead of one massive $3 million payment, the payer makes smaller payments spread out over several years, maybe 3 to 5 years.
So it smooths out the cash flow impact.
Precisely. It makes the cost more manageable and predictable for the payer's annual budget, especially for smaller plans. It directly addresses that acute budget impact.
The sources also mention subscription models, sometimes called the Netflix model. How does that work? It sounds different.
It is conceptually different. Instead of paying per patient, the payer negotiates a fixed fee, maybe annually, maybe for multiple years, for unlimited access to the therapy for their entire eligible population.
Unlimited access for a flat fee.
Yeah. The primary goal here is absolute budget predictability. The payer knows exactly what they'll spend on that drug for their population, no matter how many patients actually need it that year.
Has this been used successfully?
Yes, famously for hepatitis C cures in some state Medicaid programs and even countries like Australia, states paid a lump sum or annual fee, and the manufacturer provided the cure to everyone who needed it. It allowed them to plan for disease elimination.
What's really powerful, though, is that these models aren't mutually exclusive, right? They can be combined.
Absolutely. That's where the really sophisticated strategies come in. You can create hybrid models. Imagine an outcomes-based annuity.
Okay, so you spread the payments out over 5 years.
And each of those installment payments is contingent on the patient continuing to meet the agreed-upon clinical outcome.
So that tackles both the budget shock and the performance risks simultaneously.
Exactly. It aligns incentives and manages multiple types of risk within a single contract structure.
Let's look at how these have worked in the real world. The sources gave some key case studies. Zolgensma, the SMA therapy, $2.125 million price tag. What did they do?
Zolgensma really had to address both payer anxieties head-on. They offered a hybrid model, pretty much like we just discussed.
An annuity plus outcomes.
Yes, they offered payers the option to pay over 5 years to manage the budget shock. And they tied those payments to a 5-year outcomes contract based on the child achieving critical motor milestones, like sitting up without support.
5 years is a long time to track outcomes. That sounds incredibly complex administratively. Who tracks that kid across potentially different health plans and doctors for 5 years? Doesn't the portability problem bite you right there?
That is the operational challenge, and it highlights why the longer the contract duration, the heavier the administrative lift. It requires robust data systems, patient registries, coordinated care, things that go way beyond standard claims data. It's a huge undertaking.
Which maybe explains why the next case, Kymriah, the first CAR-T, went for something much simpler.
Probably. Kymriah, priced around $475,000 then, focused purely on short-term performance risk. They pioneered a very direct OBC. No response, no pay.
Simple as that.
Simple in concept. The outcome was binary. Did the patient achieve remission at 30 days after infusion? If yes, the payer paid. If no, the hospital or payer got a full rebate from the manufacturer.
30 days seems way more manageable than 5 years.
Administratively, yes. But even that simple model ran into major roadblocks. The initial outcomes agreement they had with CMS was actually quietly abandoned.
Why? What went wrong?
It turned out that even tracking and verifying that 30-day response consistently across different hospitals and getting the payment adjustments processed through the existing CMS systems was incredibly complex and burdensome. It showed that even simple OBCs require significant infrastructure changes.
So good idea, but the plumbing wasn't ready.
Pretty much a lesson in implementation challenges.
Okay, final case. Luxturna, for a rare retinal disease, $850,000 total. They focused on durability.
Yes, Luxturna tackled long-term durability risk directly. Their rebate arrangement wasn't just based on initial response. It included assessments way out at the 30-month mark.
How did they measure the outcome?
Using objective scores based on light sensitivity tests. So trying to measure if the vision improvement actually lasted.
And did they do anything to make it easier administratively?
They did. They structured it so the payer often purchased the drug directly from the manufacturer, bypassing the whole complex hospital buy-and-bill process for this specific drug. That simplified things for the provider.
These cases really highlight this tension, don't they? Choosing between an outcome metric that's clinically meaningful, like 5-year survival, versus one that's actually feasible to track, like 30-day response.
Absolutely. That choice directly determines the contract's operational footprint. How much administrative effort and cost is involved in making the contract work. There's a trade-off between clinical depth and administrative simplicity.
Which is a perfect segue into Section 4, because none of these innovative contracts matter if the health system hasn't done its financial homework. The sources stress that focusing only on the drugs list price is a huge mistake. You need the total cost of care, TKOC.
It's financial malpractice to just look at the WAC, the wholesale acquisition costs. The other costs, the supportive care, the hospital stay, managing side effects. The infrastructure can easily add up to as much as the drug itself or even more.
So the TKAC is the real number you need for planning and negotiation.
It's the only number that matters for understanding the true financial impact of offering the therapy.
Let's break down those other costs using CAR-ATA again. The drug might be $475,000, but what else adds up? Start before the infusion.
Okay, pre-infusion, you've got the cost of leukapheresis, the procedure to collect the patient's T cells. Then often the patient needs bridging therapy, usually chemo, to keep the cancer in check while their cells are off being engineered for several weeks. That's not cheap.
Then the infusion itself requires a hospital stay.
Yes, the peri-infusion phase, that includes lymphodepleting chemo to make space for the new CAR T cells, and then a mandatory inpatient stay, often 10 days, 20 days, sometimes 30 days or more, for intensive monitoring. That's a standard, significant hospital cost right there.
But the real budget busters are the potential complications after the infusion, right?
Definitely. Managing the serious adverse events is where costs can skyrocket unpredictably. The two big ones are cytokine release syndrome, CRS, and neurotoxicity, or ICANS.
How bad can those get financially?
If a patient develops severe CRS or ICANS, they often end up in the ICU. That means intensive monitoring, maybe ventilation, specialized nursing, and expensive drugs to counteract the reaction, like tocilizumab. Managing just one of those severe episodes can add another $500,000 or more to the bill for that single patient.
$500,000 just to manage side effects, on top of the drug cost and the planned hospital stay.
It pushes the total cost way, way up, and it's highly variable from patient to patient.
And even if everything goes perfectly, are there still ongoing costs?
Often, yes. A common long-term side effect, even with successful treatment, is B-cell aplasia. The CAR T cells wipe out the cancerous B cells, but they can also take out the healthy ones.
Leaving the patient immunocompromised.
Right. So they may need lifelong intravenous immunoglobulin IVI therapy to provide antibodies. And that IVID can cost $5,000 to $10,000 every month.
For years, potentially. Wow. That's a significant long-tail cost.
It is. It needs to be factored into the total cost picture, even for a cure.
Okay, so those are patient care costs.
Yeah.
What about the hospital's own investment before they treat the first patient? The infrastructure costs.
These are substantial and often underestimated. One source estimated that setting up a new CAR T program cost an academic center about $1.31 million up front.
The $1 million just to get ready. What's driving that cost? Is it fancy equipment?
Some of it is equipment, specialized freezers, things like that. But the single biggest chunk, maybe up to 77% according to that source, was quality assurance, regulatory compliance, and getting certified.
Certified by whom? What does that involve?
Organizations like FACI, the Foundation for the Accreditation of Cellular Therapy. Because you're handling living human cells as a therapy, the quality standards are incredibly strict, almost like pharmaceutical manufacturing.
So that cost covers.
It covers building and maintaining dedicated clean rooms, specialized cell handling equipment, writing meticulous procedures, setting up robust tracking systems for chain of custody, training staff, and paying for the audits and inspections needed to get and keep that certification. It's a massive operational undertaking.
So you add the drug costs, the complex care costs, the potential side effect costs, the long-term IVIG, and the amortized infrastructure costs.
Yeah.
That's a true total cost of care.
That's the number. And understanding that number is the prerequisite for the next step, building a value-based return on investment ROI model.
And this ROI model isn't just for the hospital's internal books, right? It's a negotiating tool.
It's the negotiating tool. It's the evidence you bring to the payer to justify the price and argue for a specific kind of innovative contract.
So we know the I in ROI is the total cost of care we just discussed. What's the R? The return. How do you calculate that?
The return side has two main components. There's the direct revenue, the payment you actually get from the payer, but the really crucial part, the core value proposition, is cost avoidance.
Cost avoidance, meaning the money the payer saves because the patient is cured.
Exactly. The model has to convincingly quantify the future healthcare costs the CGT prevents over a long period, say 5 or 10 years.
So you model the counterfactual. What would have happened and cost if the patient had stayed on the old standard of care?
Precisely. You calculate the cost of the chronic chemo cycles they won't need, the repeated hospitalizations they won't have, the expensive second and third line drugs they won't progress to, the long-term supportive care they won't require.
And you present that to the payer.
You present that calculation. You say, look, our total cost to deliver this cure is $1.2 million up front. But based on our analysis, this avoids $2.5 million in costs you would have otherwise spent on this patient over the next decade.
That completely reframes the discussion. It's not, here's our high price, it's, here's the value we're creating for your plan, and here's the data.
It changes the dynamic from a simple price negotiation to a discussion about sharing the value generated. It justifies a higher reimbursement level and makes the case for those risk-sharing innovative contracts.
So what this really means is a fundamental shift. We have to move away from fighting over price.
And towards building a partnership based on creating and sharing value, backed by solid data on both cost and outcomes.
A partnership where the provider gets paid fairly for the complex care and the cure, and the payer gets long-term savings and healthier members.
That's the ideal, yes, a symbiotic relationship.
Okay, but that ideal partnership needs to be written down. Which brings us to Section 5, the implementation imperative. You need to actually negotiate and execute these complex contracts. How do you start?
Well, negotiation itself needs a different mindset. Less adversarial haggling, more collaborative, trust-based problem solving. Both sides need to be open about what they need, what their constraints are, what data they have and don't have.
What are the trickiest terms to actually nail down in an outcomes-based contract term sheet?
There are several key sticking points. First, agreeing on the outcome metrics. They have to be objective, easy to measure reliably, clinically meaningful, and logistically feasible. That tension we talked about earlier between, say, 30-day response and 5-year survival.
Right. What else is tough?
Defining the financial model precisely. How much of the price is actually at risk? Is it a rebate paid back if the outcome fails? Or are installments only paid if the outcome succeeds? The exact cash flow mechanics need to be crystal clear.
And the big one, that patient portability clause. How do you even write a clause to handle a patient switching insurance plans mid-contract?
That's the hardest part, legally and operationally. You need pre-agreed mechanisms. How will the outcome data be shared? Who is responsible for tracking if the patient leaves the initial payer's network? How will any rebates or payments be reconciled between the old payer, the new payer, and the manufacturer?
It sounds like you almost need a neutral third party or a central system to manage that.
That's where things might be heading. Solutions like centralized data registries or state-level risk pools are being discussed, but they're complex to set up. It remains the biggest hurdle for long-term OBCs.
So, assuming you can agree on terms, making these contracts actually work day-to-day requires serious infrastructure. Pillar 1 is building the data analytics engine. What does that really mean?
It means you need IT systems capable of true data integration, pulling together data from totally different sources, the hospital's electronic health record, the payer's claims data, lab results, pharmacy data, maybe specialized registry data, into one single, coherent, longitudinal record for each patient.
That sounds incredibly difficult given how siloed healthcare data usually is.
It is. And then that system needs the capability for longitudinal tracking, following that patient's outcomes consistently over years, even if they move, change doctors, change insurers. That's a massive technical and data governance challenge.
Okay, data is one pillar. Pillar 2 is the human side, fostering a culture of collaboration.
Right. The tech is useless without the right relationships and mindset. This means moving from just transactional vendor-buyer relationships to real strategic partnerships.
How do you build that?
It requires things like setting up joint steering committees between the payer and the provider or manufacturer, defining a shared ambition. What are we trying to achieve together? Being transparent about challenges, maybe starting with smaller pilot projects to test the mechanics and build trust before rolling out a big contract.
And pillar 3, tackling the administrative nightmare. Process optimization. We can't keep
Standardization. We need standardized contract templates, common definitions for outcomes, shared data collection platforms, and potentially more centralized coordination.
like that CMS model for Medicaid you mentioned.
Exactly. The CMS cell and gene therapy access model aims to have a central body handle the outcomes tracking and payment reconciliation for multiple state Medicaid programs. That takes a huge burden off the individual states and standardizes the process. We need more initiatives like that.
Looking ahead then, say the next 5 years or so, what are the big trends shaping this CGT financial landscape?
I think 3 things really stand out. First, just the cumulative budget impact. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Meaning more therapies coming.
Yes. Experts predict maybe 10 to 20 new CGTs could be approved each year by 2025. As those stack up, the overall financial pressure on payers will become immense, making these innovative payment models an absolute necessity, not just an option.
Okay, more pressure. What's the second trend?
Standardization and scalability. The market has to move away from these one-off deals. We'll see more effort towards standardized templates, maybe third-party companies emerging to manage these contracts, or more government-led models like the CMS one. Efficiency has to improve.
And the third trend.
The rise of real-world evidence, RWE. As more patients get these therapies and are followed for longer periods outside of clinical trials, we'll get much better data on their true long-term effectiveness and durability.
And that RWE will feed back into the contracts.
Yes, crucially. This will lead to what you might call dynamic contracts.
Dynamic meaning they change over time.
Exactly. Imagine a contract where the pricing or the rebate percentage isn't fixed for 5 years. It might adjust based on the RWE that emerges.
Give me an example.
Okay, maybe a therapy launches with a 40% rebate tied to a 5-year outcome because there's uncertainty. But if, after 3 years, the real-world data shows it's performing even better than expected, the contract could dynamically adjust to lower the rebate percentage for future patients, reflecting that reduced risk.
So the contract itself learns and adapts as we learn more about the therapy's long-term value.
Precisely. It moves towards a living agreement that better aligns payment with proven real-world value over the long run. That's where RWE can really transform these agreements.
It really sounds like CGTs, because the stakes are so incredibly high, are forcing the healthcare system to build the muscles it needs for the future anyway.
That's a great way to put it. They are the ultimate stress test. The data integration capabilities, the TKSOC and ROI modeling skills, the ability to form collaborative partnerships, the experience with outcomes-based contracts.
These are all the foundational elements needed to succeed in any kind of value-based care environment, aren't they?
Absolutely. The health systems that figure out how to manage the complexity of a $3 million CGT today are building the exact capabilities they'll need to thrive as the whole system shifts towards paying for value tomorrow.
This has been, well, a really deep dive into the complicated economics behind these medical miracles. Just to quickly recap for you listening, we started with that core problem, the curative paradox, lifetime value, massive upfront cost.
We saw how the sheer scientific complexity drives that cost and why biosimilars aren't a simple fix. Then we saw how traditional payment systems like DRGs and fee-for-service just weren't built for this, leading to the payer triad of budget shock, performance risk, and the patient portability problem.
Which makes innovative payment models essential. We talked about outcomes-based contracts for performance risk, annuities for budget shock, and the power of hybrid models.
And critically, we emphasize that success depends on looking beyond the sticker price. You have to model the total cost of care, build a value-based ROI case focused on cost avoidance, and negotiate and implement these contracts collaboratively.
So the final thought here is that navigating the immense challenge of CGTs isn't just about managing one expensive drug class. The infrastructure, the data skills, the collaborative mindset you have to build. View that as a strategic investment. It's like a high-stakes learning lab.
Mastering this complexity today is what builds the competitive advantage for navigating the entire future value-based economy. The institutions that get this right will likely lead the way.
A fascinating, if challenging, look ahead. Thanks for walking us through all that complexity.
My pleasure. It's a critical conversation to be having.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.
This is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient or pharmacist-patient relationship is formed. Using this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Clinical experts created the references, content, and clinical insight. NotebookLM, a Google AI tool, created the audio content, which I extensively reviewed before release. Finally, the host states that he takes all conflicts of interest seriously. Currently, there are no conflicts to disclose. For all of his disclosures and the companies he invests in or advises, he directs users to reach out independently, where he keeps an up-to-date and active list of all disclosures.